I'm Chris Watson from Endor Learn and Develop, and I'm excited to be sharing with you some practical ideas to help you refocus your energy and attention during periods of uncertainty. Welcome aboard. Endor Learn and Develop have been around for nearly 20 years, and we're a specialist provider of behaviourally based learning and development services. We're going to get into the area of ability to focus, and I'm going to be asking you to call attention to what has your attention. If we know our sense of purpose, if we've got that defined, this is much, much easier to achieve. Are your thoughts, your behaviors and your actions in line? Are they congruent with that purpose or with that goal that you're focusing on at the moment? There is an app called Track Your Happiness. It's an iPhone app, and it's been downloaded by hundreds of thousands of people, and they're asked to interact based on the activity that they're currently performing. And consistently what that has revealed is that the happiest people are the people who are involved and engaged in a singular activity. And we also know that what you focus on magnifies. So there can be good and bad consequences of this. And a great way to illustrate this is something called white car syndrome. And this is where you think, actually, for my next car, I'm going to get an unusual colour. I'm going to get something that will stand out and that I don't see all the time. So you invest and you go to the showroom and you find actually a gleaming white car. And you think, actually, this is something a bit different. Then you go on the motorway, or you sat at a cafe looking out and you notice something. And it's not because the universe has pulled more white cars into the world. It's just because it's actually part of what you're focusing on now. So it magnifies, it amplifies. So there's a real responsibility to make sure that you focus on the right things. Another opportunity around focus is to sort of exert the greatest leverage at the best possible times for you as an individual. And I'm going to share with you some feedback from a very respected publication, HR News, in 2020, from 1,500 people in the UK. What they found was that the professions that felt most productive earliest in the day were accountants at 9:48, typically precise for accountants, civil servants at 11, plumbers and electricians and builders also at 11, admin and office workers at about 11:45, and the IT crowd at 11:48. And professions that felt productive latest were sales, HR, finance, operations, and also teachers. Now, in reality, I suspect that there isn't one particular profile built around an occupation. However, what we do see is that there is a U-shaped curve that does occur. It means first thing in the morning, or whenever you get up, people feel pretty focused shortly afterwards. Then this dips down, and then it comes back later on in the day, depending upon your working hours and your shift patterns and so forth. We also know that the most unproductive moment, according to numerous surveys, is just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the majority of people. And all this is saying is that if you are going to apply focus, actually consider doing it when your mind is at its most sharp. Another opportunity in the work context to maintain focus is, of course, to minimize disruptions. In the United States, the third largest cause of death is actually prescription errors and prescription mistakes. It's an enormous problem. So what they did to combat this, which led to an 88% reduction in prescription mistakes, was to highlight the importance of the dispensing activity around the wards. So anyone delivering medication to patients began to wear a red tabard with information around that they shouldn't be disturbed, not to contact them, not to speak to them while they had the tabard on. And I say this led to an 88% reduction in prescription mistakes. But this also applies to your working life. This is all the common time management things about personal effectiveness around maybe answering emails twice a day rather than constantly throughout the day, using a full screen rather than lots of minimized, slightly open screens to provide greater focus, to let people know if you're doing some detailed work, to have a notice on your office if you have an office, and saying during 10 and 11 today, I'm going to be doing this report that involves a lot of detailed thought and I can't be disrupted. Ultimately, we want you to avoid the fate of the lion. This picture's very dramatic. A lot of focus is on the whip that's used, but the real work here is done by the chair. And the reason is it links to this notion of the paradox of choice, because sometimes seeing too much at once can actually paralyze us. And that's exactly what happens with the lion. Being confronted by 4 different legs at the same time, the lion doesn't know which one to go for first. And the problem today is we've got so many opportunities for being disrupted. It's been estimated that the average edition of the New York Times contains as much distinctive information as the average person encountered in their entire lifetime in the 17th century. Now, on top of this, you add on social media, you add on TikTok, you add on LinkedIn, Facebook, emails, texting, Snapchat, whatever else there is, and we're just constantly being bombarded. And it can lead to this. Multitasking doesn't work. Women are better at multitasking. They've actually got more neural receptors in the brain than men have. But despite that, for both sexes, if you try to keep more than a few things in your mind at once, you do lose the objectivity about the relationships with each of them. So less important things on that to-do list, for example, will bother you more than you should. You don't give the important and the long-term stuff the focus it needs. And so you become at the mercy of the latest and the loudest. So somehow we've got to find a way of retaining that focus. This is a massive oversimplification, but it's a lovely and accessible way of thinking about the way the brain works. Some of you may have heard about this before, but I like to think of the brain as 2 separate brains. We have a manual, deliberate system, and we've also got an automatic system which differs in its approaches, and you can use either of these. Now, the deliberate system is a bit like the smart professor. The problems with the smart professor is he can only do one thing at once. And it tends to be high-level cognitive thinking, deep thinking are all processed and take place in the deliberate system. Habitual behaviours, things that don't require much thought, things that we've tried and tested over and over again, tends to be in the automatic system. So these are embedded habitual behaviour patterns. Constantly switching activities puts demands on the deliberate system. So switching activities from one thing to another actually depletes prefrontal cortex. And this is the key part of the brain for reasoning, problem solving, impulse control, making decisions, resilience, all in this area. They're called executive functions. They're also related to use of short-term working memory and our ability to respond effectively to things that need cognition. What happens is if we do get overloaded and lots of task switching does just this. This is why sometimes you come home from work and you feel you've done nothing, but you've been making lots of small decisions about things, and it does drain you and does deplete you. Too many demands on the deliberate system decreases regulation of cortisol, that's the stress hormone, changes in hippocampus, and that's to do with memory, so your memory gets impaired, and it leads to lower attention, lower concentration span, lower short-term memory, increased stress or erratic sleep patterns, it diminishes your willpower. So what can we do about this? Your little professor, your frontal cortex and your cognitive load is a depleting and diminishing resource. The more you use it, the less you have. Now that's different for the automatic system, whereby you can do more than one thing at once. And there was a fascinating piece of research that had been replicated many times. What they did was they wanted to see whether or not getting someone to test their willpower would actually deplete their other energy levels. So even physical challenges can be impaired, the sort of argument was, by exercising your existing mental muscle too much. So they asked people to do something which really does require a lot of willpower, which are wall sits, as you can see here. They split people into two different groups and they did one wall sit and they were timed and that was recorded. And then they asked them to fill in a questionnaire, take a breather, and then they would do the wall sits again. And this saw if there was any variation. All of the people who took part in the exercise were told not to eat for 2 or 3 hours beforehand. But one of the groups, in the room where they were completing the questionnaire after the first wall sit, their willpower was challenged because on the table was some hot cookies. Okay, and they said that it was for something else, they couldn't have those, but please concentrate on the questionnaire. The other group just had the questionnaire and they completed that. Guess what happened when two groups were measured again doing the wall sit? So there's two groups, one who had to sit and endure for 5 minutes the warm cookies and the warm cookie smell, and they were probably a little bit hungry, and the other group just sat and completed the questionnaire without the cookies. Who do you think performed better?
I'm going to go with the ones without the cookie smell.
It was. With the cookie, showed a loss in performance of about 30%. It was the fact that they were using some of their mental resource, their mental muscle, by resisting the allure of the cookie. There was no variation whatsoever with the group that didn't have the cookie in the room. So it suggests that they had the same willpower reserve. Does that make sense? This resisting temptation, which we think is a worthwhile thing to do, depletes some of this mental energy that we have from the deliberate system or from that prefrontal cortex, which is situated at the front of your brain. So what can you do about that? What do you think is happening in that little clip? It's to do with heart rate variation. Okay, and this all sounds very fanciful, but it's not. Traditionally, people's health was measured by the number of beats per second. Cameron, you can probably tell us what a healthy heartbeat rate is, but I think resting, is it something like 60 to 90 beats per minute or something like that? And for decades, the medical profession has used this as a barometer of your health. More recently, what people look at is the spacing between those beats. It's called the interbeat rate. And the reason is healthy people have got typically varied interbeat rate. It's not the same. Depressed people have got a very, very consistent heart rate variation. When you're sleeping at night in REM or deep sleep, your heart rate variation increases and it's at its most varied. So to make you healthier, bizarrely, what we need to do is somehow influence your heart rate variation, because when you get stressed, when you put pressure on yourself, there's very little variation between it. And what happens is, by taking deep breaths and slowing your breathing down to around about 4 to 6 breaths per minute, it changes that heart rate variation and it puts you in a more relaxed state. Okay, you have to do it for about 2 or 3 minutes. More significantly, what it does, it makes you more resourceful and has been proven to increase your willpower levels. There are some other ways as well of increasing willpower. Here's a very easy one to adopt. You have to click your fingers exactly 50 times. Alternatively, count backwards from 100 in sevens. And both of them, what they do is they strengthen your prefrontal cortex. Long term, the best way is exercise, as Cameron suggested, and athletes tend to have a much more varied heart rate variation. Meditation also works well, but this starts to provide some reasons why meditation is so good for you. Another way of strengthening the prefrontal cortex is to learn to juggle. And the idea of getting into good habits is being really popularized at the moment, because the more you can habitualize certain behaviors, the less pressure and the less tasking you're putting on your automatic system. So anything that is possible to habitualize or automate is going to do you some good. And this, you may have seen this in the past, is the reason why Steve Jobs wore the same clothing every day for 10 years. Why?
To reduce decision fatigue.
Perfect. And for something that he regarded as quite trivial, rather than every morning start to tap into that limited resource that we've all got and start depleting that resource, he chose to say, well, actually, this is something that isn't important to me. In the morning, what I'll do is I'll get up, I'll wear a black top, pair of jeans and a pair of sneakers. And that's what he did. Now, clearly, if you have a role where if you're a customer facing or you're a salesperson or a consultant and you're seeing a variety of people, what you wear may be integral to you, your identity, or to your job, and it might not be possible to turn up in the same outfit every single day. So you might have to make decisions. But what this is saying is, where there are routine things that you do that aren't that important, are the ways to sort of automate those or habitualize those. In the same way, Barack Obama was also advised around some of these things, and Barack Obama only wore 2 colors of suits, one gray and one blue, and the blue's used for formal state occasions and the gray one for other events, because then he didn't have to think about which one should I wear. That green looks quite good, or Michelle, what do I look like in this? Okay, we're moving towards the end now. Are there any other tips, any other ways that you can strengthen your willpower and maybe protect some of that prefrontal cortex and the decision-making function that we all need to really look after and use as a limited resource? It's been estimated that excuse me, urges that lead to distraction last for no more than 10 minutes. So if you imagine, say for example, habitually you respond to a ping on your phone, I'll just have a quick look, that urge to do that almost definitely will last no more than 10 minutes. So what you can do is say to yourself, oh, that's tempting. I'm going to have a look at that, but I will do it in 10 minutes time. So if you recognize in yourself that you're having urges, there are possible distractors, things that will help you lose your focus, and there's a wealth of evidence to say it's going to take you up to about 20 minutes to get back into that pocket of being as focused as you were. We also know that each time you keep swapping tasks, you're depleting your mental resources. It's not a good idea. The way to start to overcome it is to say, I'm going to wait 10 minutes. The more you do this as well, after the 10 minutes come, what I've noticed is you no longer see it as urgent, you no longer see it as attractive, and you no longer see it as something that has to happen. And actually, it's a great way of starting to re-educate yourself away from those apparently urgent things that need to be addressed, and just keeping in the moment, in the present moment, and focused on some of those key tasks and activities. We've covered 15 themes. My most recent book, which is called Upskill, has got 825 more practical ideas to extend capability and performance in the workplace. It's based on a 10-year funded study where we were given some money to find out what is it that organizations value today. And these are the 21 skills. And so what it does, it delivers a dynamic snapshot of different strategies, tools, techniques, and ideas that people can introduce for themselves with no budget whatsoever, that will make a demonstrable difference to them back in the workplace. The reason I'm shoehorning this book, which I will say was #1 in Amazon Business Reference Book, is not because of that fact, but because within it, there are chapters on resilience and emotional control, change management, intuitive thinking, and how you build up intuitive thinking, and also results focus. So I've rushed through 15 ideas for you, but if you do want another 825, they are within the book. So many thanks. Hopefully I'll have the pleasure of working with you again, and what I'd really like is perhaps in a more face-to-face interactive kind of context. If that doesn't happen, good luck with the grey monotony of the rest of lockdown, and let's hope and pray that it ends soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For
Thanks,
today,
Chris. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.